My name is Jacob Totson, and welcome to the Wisdom of Odin. Today I have a story to share with you I think you're going to want to pay attention to. For today I have a story about Odin, particularly Odin veneration within the last 200 years. The story comes to us from the Orkney Islands here in Scotland. Sadly, I cannot be there today to share with you this story, but I hope this view makes up for that fact. So on the Orkney Islands, there is a stone called the Stone of Odin. And this stone was the center point of pagan worship and celebrations for hundreds, if not thousands of years. The earliest date that we have of reference to this stone goes all the way back to the 1600s. But more than likely, it's been there ever since the time of the early pagan tribes. Because the Orkney Islands were inhabited by many people from the Scandinavian world, and so therefore a lot of the pagan traditions that existed here were actually related to Norse Paganism from the past. Now what makes this stone so interesting and connected to Odin is the fact that it's a standing stone that was put there by the early settlers of the Orkney Islands. But then in the center of this stone is a hole that has been carved out, almost looking like a singular eye. I do want to share with you two of the earliest accounts we have of the stones coming from 1693 and then into the 1700s. Betwixt the stones of Stenness and the bridge are two stones standing, of the same largeness with the rest, whereof one has a round hole in the midst of it. 125 yards to the east of the watchstone is another stone with a hole in it on one side towards the bottom, from which going towards the circle is another 73 yards from the fosse. And also in the 1700s we have the first drawing of the Odin stone. Now to this point as well, I want to mention the other standing stones that are near the Odin stone. Now the most impressive of these stones is a stone circle that is just simply called the stone circle of Stenness. Now what makes this stone circle so interesting, besides its pure beauty, is the fact that it might be the oldest stone circle in all of the British Isles. There are three other standing stones that have been mentioned throughout history, one of them being the Odin stone and the other one being the Watchstone. Additionally, there are some rumors that there was another stone that was a twin of the Odin stone, and there are a couple of depictions that show two different stones with holes in them. However, the Odin stone itself seems to be the only one that is mentioned throughout history. Within the late 1700s is when many people began to explore the Orkney Islands and the traditions there, and many people started to draw the Odin stone as it was a very popular landmark to the locals here. So we have many different depictions of the stone today, and the one I'm showing you on the screen now is probably the one closest to what the stone looked like, as many people mention being able to put an entire head through the stone, or at least the head of a small child. And even in this one depiction, it was described as a sacrificial stone, and it was rumored to actually have stuck people's head through the stone to have them beheaded at some point within the stone's history. Now, it seems like this tradition had ended by the point people started exploring and researching these stones, and so it's not really recorded within the traditions that survived within the, at least modern era at this time. The most important tradition that seems to be held around the Odin stone is partaking of what was called an Odin oath, meaning that you stuck your hand through the stone and grabbed hold of another person's hand within the village, or just stuck your hand through the stone to talk to Odin himself, and you made an oath. Now this is of course interesting because Odin and oaths are something that are very synonymous with one another even into the modern Norse pagan era now, and so to see this traditional village practicing things for hundreds of years the same way they had for hundreds of years prior, I think is very interesting that we're really not that far off in the modern era, knowing that Odin is very connected to oaths. The young man was called before the session. The elders were particularly severe. Being asked by the minister the cause of so much rigor, they answered, "You do not know what a bad man this is. He has broke a promise to Odin." Being further asked what they meant by the promise of Odin, they put him in mind of the stone of Stenhouse, with a round hole in it, and added that it was customary, when promises were made, for the contracting parties to join hands through the hole, and the promises so made that they were called promises of Odin. So here we have an account of something within a local community here that the elders of the community took these oaths very seriously. Now, much like modern Europe, a lot of people probably didn't necessarily see Odin as a deity or these as religious practices, but just as cultural practices. But what I find interesting here is that people saw them as binding agreements, or at least in such a way that if you broke one of these oaths that were made through the Odin stone hole, you were seen as a really bad person within the town. And this is something, again, we see within the Prose and Poetic Edda, that the worst of society were the oath breakers. Most of the research around the Odin stone seemed to come from around 1784 from Dr. Robert Henry, who worked for the Society of Antiquarians, researching the Orkney Islands. He has many different accounts of different traditions that were held around this stone in 1784 when he was observing the population. I think the most interesting of these accounts that Dr. Robert Henry wrote down is of a marriage ceremony, or at least a love dance ceremony that happened around the stone that is just screaming different pagan elements, and this is we're really getting into the nitty-gritty of how ceremonious this stone was to the people of the Orkney Islands. The parties agreed, stole from the rest of their companions, and went to the Temple of the Moon, the Stones of Steness, where the woman, in presence of the man, fell down on her knees and prayed to the god Woden, for such was the name of the god they addressed, that he would enable her to perform all promises and obligations she had as to make to the young man present, after which they both went to the Temple of the Sun, the Ring of Brodgar, where the man prayed in a similar manner to the woman. Then they went to Odin's stone, the man being on one side and the woman on the other. They took hold of each other's hands right through the hole, and there swore to be constant and faithful to each other. And again, this is an account from 1784. This is not a time period I think many people think about a height of pagan practices. Most people are very concerned with the British Empire at this point, or having revolutions in the Americas. So the fact that people, in the world were having rituals of love to Odin. I hope this is insane for you as well, because I've never heard this story before, and I absolutely love it. Now, the Odin stone is also seen as a healing object, and many people that had lame limbs, that had crippled limbs, would put them through the stone and leave offerings of ale and food at the foot of the stone, praying to Odin for its healing powers. I think this also combines with what we know of the Celtic practices of the pagan era as well, where people saw these megalithic objects as portals to the other world. And so by putting your hand through this stone circle, by putting your body through it, you were accessing that other world. You were going into something sacred. So it really seems to have been seen as a portal to the other world, particularly to the realm of Odin. The stone's healing powers were often combined with the water of the nearby well at Bigswell. There, the affected were circle the well 3 times sunwise before drinking the water and heading off to the Odin stone. Children were also bathed in the well before they were taken to the hold monolith. I also saw accounts of mothers taking their newborn children to the Odin stone and passing them through the center circle to pray for them to have an easy childhood and not to have any ailments that would allow them to survive adolescence. The last account I want to share with you here is about a man who was praying to the stone and the ritual that he performed in order to connect with Odin. For 9 moons at midnight, when the moon was full, went 9 times on his bare knees around the Odin stone of Stennis. The 9 moons at full moon, he looked through the hole at the Odin stone and wished he might get the power of seeing Hildeland. Now, sadly, this is where the story takes a sad turn. If you haven't noticed, I've been saying everything in the past tense because the Odin stone no longer stands today, despite its prevalence in society on the Orkney Islands. Many people within the town saw this as a very sacred and prized possession. Apparently, towards the beginning of the 1800s, people began to use it less, but it was still seen as an important cultural tradition. However, a farmer that owned the land, or at least had a claim to this land, did not like the visitors he had coming to view the Odin stone, or any of the stones on his property. He managed to take apart the Odin stone, as well as 2 others, before being stopped by the local villagers. Not much was done at this point, as the Odin stone was demolished. Its remains moved to a stone quarry, where they sat for another 100 years. And then sadly in 1940, the stones that used to be the Odin stone were demolished down to dust, and all but memories faded away to time. This is a tragic story of traditions from the past that survived hundreds and hundreds and thousands of years into an era that many things disappeared. And sadly too, the physical object known as the Odin stone is gone. But what I see as important is sharing this story with you. I hope you carry on these stories and traditions of the Odin stone with you and share them with others so that it may never truly fade away to memory.